Hey guys, welcome back. Robocraft Early Access coverage. This is episode 15. I'm Enigmius, and today, changing direction a little bit. We were working on a Tier 8 rail walker, a vehicle that had the walker legs and rail guns. The idea being taking advantage of the ability for the walker legs to let us go almost anywhere, and when we stop, be perfectly still so that we can take advantage of the accuracy of the rail guns. That was the whole idea. And one of the viewers suggested that I try and do something of a hybrid vehicle tutorial, and the suggestion came at just the right time because I was already thinking that I wasn't 100% happy with the rail walker we had come up with up to that point, and I was receptive to something new, and it just so worked out that this is what we ended up doing. Now, the first thing that I'm starting off with here, you can see just so it doesn't get away from us, is trying to enclose the driver's seat in an armor core pod that will allow us to connect things to it without too much difficulty, but not transmit damage willy-nilly to the base of the driver's seat, because that's kind of the ultimate sin, especially with a flyer, because flyers take damage from literally every single direction. It's very easy, I've found, to trick myself into thinking that if I make it solid from underneath, that I'll be safe, and that's not true, because when you bank to turn, your sides are exposed and your top is exposed, and it happens all the time. You're never ever flying straight constantly. You're always banking and turning and adjusting and trying to hit different targets at different situations. You've got targets on different angles shooting up at you. It's best to assume that you're going to be taking hits from all over, and so that's what we're trying to do here with this design. Now, one of the drawbacks to the whole walker leg thing is that it's very slow. It's almost painfully slow. You're mobile, you feel like you're getting somewhere, you don't feel like you're losing the battle against the terrain or anything like that, and if you do a little bit of clever work with thrusters so that you can tilt your vehicle forward or backwards in the air, you can do things like jump from a flat surface, tilt 90 degrees backwards, and then land with your legs on a vertical surface. Things like that are cool, but by the time you get to where you need to be, sometimes it's too late. Sometimes you can't readjust as you might like. You get to the place where you thought you would be useful, and after 30 seconds you realize you're not. And the only way to properly resolve that is to relocate. And if you can't do that quickly, it makes it very hard to contribute the way that I would like to. So if we can get something set up where we have the speed advantage of a flyer with the stability, the all-terrain stability of a walker, then that's kind of the ideal situation for us. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to get this driver's seat squared away. So we built the pod, and the nature of the pod is that the bottom is going to be where the driver's seat attaches. So I put a little bit of extra blocks, you see the little wiggly spine underneath, to hopefully absorb as much damage heading upwards towards that driver's seat block as I possibly can. Now, we're using the knuckle idea that we came up with previously to join this little spine to the main pod in a way that's very robust. There's a lot of blocks keeping that connection solid. It's not easy to basically break off that entire spine and leave the underside of the pod vulnerable. But at the same time, it's not this huge process of trying to figure out angled blocks and stuff. That was the main thing that I had with the Triforce, is that you get things set up the way you want. You stop and you figure out how you want everything to go, and then if you want to change something, it's like re-engineering that entire section of the vehicle. This makes it very easy to make those modifications, and then you can see we're going to add some more prisms along the side. And really, this is just, again, extending the armor core kind of setup. The prisms, with the angle that they're on, can still direct damage directly upwards. You can see as we're going across placing them, there's nothing stopping the damage from going directly upwards into the tetras and the prisms and all the other stuff that we want to protect. But for the time being, it's able to absorb more damage coming off of that center spine than if we had just left that center spine by itself. And it's also giving a little bit of extra coverage on the angles, so that it's harder to get a clean shot to the block directly beneath the driver's seat. And then we can add tetras and we can add more prisms after the fact, so that we can again control the flow of damage back into the spine and away from the pod if we want to. But the main thing here is getting things set up with the basics, like I talked about previously. early on. One of the things that we need to do, especially with a vehicle like this, with the Flyer, is we need to place the guns, because rail guns, like we said, take up a ton of space. Now, one of the things that I learned working with these rail guns, the Tier 9 guns, is that they can overlap on the horizontal plane that one block where the circle sort of goes. And you'll see that with the front two guns, how they overlap. So that's something working in our favor in terms of the amount of space that we need. But the difficulty with having guns spaced like this is you either have to have a ton of blocks to make a very solid platform for these guns to sit on, or you have to have these really extended kind of spine, bone, whatever you want to call it, connections like you can see we're working on now, in order to keep them far enough apart that they can stay on the vehicle and do their job. That's one of the hardest parts about doing this. So again, the best thing that I've found that works for me is to build whatever structure you need, as ugly as it might be, just to get that gun in place where it fits. Right? You find out it's as close to everything that you can get it without conflicting and basically being told, no, you can't put that here. Once you've done that, then worry about the connection itself. And you can see what we did was we brought as much of that connection in as we possibly could, as opposed to just having the whole thing dangling out in the middle of empty space where a single SMG shot can knock out the entire weapon. And then we can build around this and underneath it to provide protection so that it's not easy to take out our guns with the least amount of effort. So that's kind of the thing that I was working on with the guns, is again starting out with that idea of get them in place first and then worry about the connection after. So once we got the guns on, now we got legs. We got to get these legs taken care of. We have to get them on in a position where they're not going to conflict with the guns, while at the same time leaving room for the wings. This is a much more compact build than our last ones because, again, we're putting a lot on it, and it's a Flyer, and we don't want this massive vehicle that's just this big inviting target for plasma bombers and plasma tanks especially. It's embarrassing as a Flyer when you get shot by a plasma tank, because they're the least able to lob the long distance stuff with that kind of accuracy towards a moving target and hit it. So the smaller we can make this, the harder it is for those guys to hit us, and the less we have to worry about the shame and embarrassment of getting clobbered by plasma tanks while we're just trying to get from point A to point B. We're using the Halloween wings. I did manage to save up for a single pair of Halloween. I'm kind of hoping that Free Jam leaves them in the block, in the Cube Depot. I'm not counting on it. They never promised they would, but I'm hoping that they had a change of heart. But I wanted to get at least a couple. They're expensive. They're like more than double the price of Tier 8 wings. Maybe. I don't know. I looked at buying the Tier 8 wings, and I looked at buying these, and I said I'm going to buy these, but they're more expensive. That's the whole point. So you can see we've got one wing on, we've got two legs on, we've got two guns on. We've basically taken care of one side of the vehicle, and now we just have to duplicate across to the other side. Duplicate the connections, duplicate the components, and hope that they fit. What I can tell you in this case is that the wings aren't going to fit. The wings are a little bit asymmetrical in the way that they're oriented, so we had to make some adjustments, and that's fine. We observe that the wings aren't fitting the way that we expected them to, but we can make some adjustments, we can make some corrections. There's absolutely no reason to abandon the build because things didn't want to fit. You can see here, we've got the legs where they're supposed to be, and now I'm trying to put the wing where it is on the other side, and it won't go. It doesn't want to go. So the solution to make it easier on ourselves is to just extend the vehicle, give ourselves a few extra blocks on the front so that we can move the legs forward one block, and then we'll be able to put the wings where they're supposed to go and be symmetrical all the way across. So you can see this one's connected, but if you look down, it's off by one block. We can't put this one forward, spin it around and line it up the way it's supposed to be. We can't move it forward, so we have no choice. We have to move the legs forward. With these in place, we'll have enough that we can go and test the vehicle. And that's always, I kind of put it off in this case because we had so many components that I wanted to fit on before I was the least bit worried about how I was going to handle in the practice map. But it's still necessary. Flyers are the most challenging kinds of vehicles to build, I find. Flyers and hover vehicles. If you want a well-performing, well-handling hover vehicle, that can be challenging as well. But flyers in particular, there are so many different components that come into play, and so many, and by components I mean components of flight, not necessarily components of the vehicle, You want, ideally, a vehicle that flies kind of level on its own. You want something that takes off well, that doesn't have a tendency to flip over at the very start of a match. There's all kinds of different things to experiment with in the process of building a flyer that it takes a while, and then you kind of get the basics the way you want it, and you start adding to the vehicle, and all of a sudden you realize that those things that you added have completely changed the handling dynamics of the vehicle. So you see here, we call that a unsuccessful test of the vehicle. Now, it's possible with the right additions to the vehicle, the right modifications, that we could still take off and have a vehicle that would be able to, survive. But the thing is, you run into a problem at the beginning of matches as a flyer. If something like that happens where you just flip over and you have to go to plan B, you can end up running into obstacles in the terrain that make it very, very difficult to take off, if not impossible. I've had vehicles that I thought were in good shape to fly and connect and do all the things that they were supposed to do, and then I get them into a match, and the first thing that happens is I flip over because I get this short runway, so to speak, and before I have an opportunity to correct the situation, I'm like 90 degrees into a barrier of some kind, and that's it. The match is over for me. I can't move. So we want to avoid that at all cost. So with this setup here, we're trying to manage so that when we jump, we don't tip forward immediately. And you can see there's a little bit of tipping, but at the same time, we've got a little bit of leeway, we've got a little bit of grace, and we're airborne. The vehicle is missing rudders. We're actually going to add the rudders in the next episode, and we're going to finish off building out around it as much as we can with the CPU. This is going to be another one of those builds where all the things that we would like to have on the vehicle and all the things that end up on the vehicle are not the same because we run out of CPU, or I don't think robo ranking ends up being an issue for this build, but you can see we're able to traverse a certain amount of distance much faster than we would with walker legs and put ourselves in a position where we can land, and then it all goes to hell. We can only do so much with these early builds sometimes, but I would call this a successful test, at least in proof of concept. These little crevasses that it's just so easy to get perma stuck in them, but the walker actually helps us to recover better than, say, a hover or a wheeled vehicle, because we're not as restricted by the vertical surfaces as we otherwise might have been. So a little bit of proof of concept. The vehicle is doing all right. The guns are not benefiting from the slope chassis like we had before, but still, the nature of the walker legs means we can peer over things to get the better shots and then back off. It's not as ideal as just being able to barely peek over and then duck away. 6 of one, half dozen of the other when it comes to having all of that benefit of the tilted chassis but not being anywhere near the fight and not being able to get there in time to do anything, versus being able to get anywhere we want much faster but not necessarily having the ideal gun placement to keep ourselves as safe as we might like to be. So this is the critical part of the testing phase, and there's so many people who don't even go into the practice map at all with their vehicles. This is it's not just learning if the vehicle works, it's also getting used to the handling of the vehicle, because this thing right now with no rudders is not easy to control. You may have noticed by now, but we climb up on something and then we jump and then we see how far can we get and how fast can we get there, and then we learn a little bit each time we have a successful flight. We learn a little bit about how the vehicle handles, and we're practicing. That's the practice map is for practicing. How many months before we figured this out, that it's a good idea to practice with a new bot before we go into a match and basically end up on our back in the first 15 seconds. When this vehicle is done, the goal is to basically snipe from a location, jump and fly to the next location, use whatever terrain is necessary to get a good angle on our targets, and have that option to either advance or escape based on the situation. So that's kind of what we're working towards, and surprisingly, for the little amount of time that we've spent building, we're almost there. So the next episode, like I say, we're going to finish off the control surfaces, we're going to do some more testing, we're going to get into our first match. We'll see how she does. If you want to be notified when I add that episode, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel and or follow me on the social media. Links for social media are in the information section below the video. Please leave your comments and feedback. I changed up the time-lapse in this episode a little bit. I slowed it down compared to the last episode. Just, it's a little easier to see without being drawn out like if I had just left it playing at normal speed. So let me know what you think about that. Let me know what you think about the bot. As always, guys, thanks for watching and take care.